Welcome to Friendly Disruption. This is episode 10. This episode, we'll be talking to Megan Sova-Tower, who's a teacher at CCSD. Patrick will be sharing some tools on how to engage shy learners, and we'll be having conversations about the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, Universal Design for Learning (UDL), and whatever else kind of strikes our fancy for the next few minutes. So with that, we're going to kick right into it, and I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to talk about some tools and strategies for engaging kids who maybe are a little harder to reach out to in class.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things. I think we have a lot of students, I think, in our classroom who, for one reason or another, just may not be the ones who participate a lot in class. They may not be the most vocal, but then those aren't always the students that we're designing things for. I think about, I have kind of like three big things always. I think about how we can engage, and I'm going to put the word shy as kind of an umbrella term, even though that's not really maybe a term I'd use specifically for each student. It could be because they have a hearing issue or they have a speech issue. I have one of my close friends had a bad stuttering in school, and so he didn't want to really participate a whole lot, or they may have a vision issue. They may just have a confidence issue or anxiety. We are seeing a much higher number of students in the classroom with anxiety issues nowadays. So I think there's kind of like three things, and not really just specific tools, but three methods I would do with students to help engage them more into the classroom. And some of these I've seen in my own classroom when I was in the classroom. But number one is to just have some sort of back channel. You have a back channel in the classroom, a way for students to maybe pose questions during class without having to raise their hand. And then to also give students a chance after class to participate, especially if they need more time to process. I know a lot of students who they just need that processing time. They're not going to be very quick with a response or an answer or anything like that. And, I'm even one of those people sometimes. I can be sitting in a staff meeting or just me with other people, and it may look like I'm not really doing much because I'm really trying to think about the thing I want to say. I want to phrase it in a certain way, or I just want to be able to say exactly what I want to say. It may take some more time. And so when I was in my flipped classroom a few years back, one of the best things I saw is that I had this way for students to ask questions beyond the class. Pretty much they could post something at any time of day, and we take care of it in class the next day. And I saw a lot of posts from a couple students that I never would have expected that from, because I knew they weren't the ones that really actively engage, participate in class out, verbally, but give them a chance to do it digitally, and they're able to do that. So, one of my favorite tools, I use my Swiss Army knife of tools, Padlet. I just have a simple Padlet set for questions. Maybe you organize it, new way to have it. You can have those areas organized. What are the questions you have? What are things you still want to learn? Something like that. Just have that set up for each class or each week so kids can easily post to it. And because students can do that anonymously, I think that helps out greatly. And you can even answer directly on that. You can make comments and stuff onto the Padlet post. So Padlet would be one of my number one tools there. Of course, I have to say Google Forms. It's easy to set up that Google form. You can even send an alert to send you, an email when somebody fills it out. So that somebody's using that to ask a question that maybe they're not able to ask out loud. Google Classroom has a nice feature in there where you can do a poll, kind of just a single question. And you can do that kind of at the end of each class or at the beginning of each class, just to make sure you give students a chance to ask those questions. And there are those dedicated back channel tools, like Today's Meet is a big one, or even just having a hashtag, depending on the size of your class or the age of your students too. But back channel is kind of number one thing I do.
You're getting me interested in thinking about a couple of other things here. So is anybody else here? And I kind of went fast on Megan's introduction. I apologize for that. We'll give her a chance to talk here a little more in a second. But one of the things I saw that just got released in the last few weeks is that Google has released a Q&A feature in Slides. Have you worked with that at all? Anybody worked with that? I haven't used it much, but I've seen it. It looks really cool. It looks like it would fit that back channel role pretty interestingly, but I hadn't really put that together until you were talking, Patrick.
Yeah, and the Q&A feature has been around just a little bit of a while, and it's something that I've tried using at some of the conferences I presented at. You just have to make sure you test it, how it works, because if you close out of everything, it closes it out. So you kind of just have to keep some window open to keep that open. But it is something where they can easily then post those questions.
Okay. Yeah, you tend to go straight to a Google form, though, more from a practitioner standpoint rather than something like that. Sounds like.
Yeah, Padlet would be probably my number one, but I use Padlet probably for way more things than most people. It's just one of my kind of Swiss Army knives of tools.
Sure, sure.
I think this is really an important concept. You know, from the get-go, you use the word design, and it is about designing and planning for. You know, oftentimes we think about students' abilities, whether it be their ability to read or their ability to understand or their ability to write. But really, in this case, it's not about an ability. It might just be a preference. I would prefer to keep my mouth shut in a classroom because I get anxious when I'm talking in front of a group, or I prefer to not speak out loud because, yes, I do have a stutter. I think when we start getting into allowing kids their preference in responding, that's really the center of universal design and for learning. I think that's really that's when we've hit the gold star. And I love Padlet too. It's it's an easy tool, and I think it's easy for kids. And the way that you can set it up to be anonymous, yet everybody can see it. I think that's critical. So everybody's able to get their thoughts out or their questions out. You can still be anonymous if it's something as far as just anxiety about the content or the question that you're posing.
Yeah, and I think one mistake that we make a lot is that a lot of classrooms are designed for one specific type of student. You almost think those characteristics that are going to let you be successful, but we need to design a classroom that's for every student, not just one type. I liken it to like a video game where there's different types of players in a video game. You can select the different characters, and one is really good for a certain type of level, but really we don't want that type of situation in our classroom. We want all the players to be successful.
That's a great point. Did you have any other, was really the back channel the main piece here, Patrick? Because I don't want to cut you off.
No, that'd be one of the big ones. But one of the things I think, and I've made this suggestion, I think, to a lot of people, we have students who present a lot in classes. The classroom presentation is just a common thing where they're doing a group or individual, and one thing I think we can do with that, especially if you're talking about a classroom that's one-to-one or anything, really, if you have some sort of technology available, giving the students the option of either doing the presentation or creating a video, doing something else, an animation, a comic, something where they still are sharing that information, but maybe it's not so much they have to stand in front of the students because, again, students with high anxiety or any of those other issues, staying in front of their classmates to present could be a very, very traumatic event, especially if it's building upon trauma they've had previously. And so giving them a chance to create a video, I think, is allowing them still to do the task, but in a different way so that it's not something where it's turning them off of the learning. That is a big one too. And then the last thing I'd probably say is, one thing I'd like to see more is when we put students who are typically those shy students in class and we make them work in groups, we don't teach them how to work in groups and we don't give that feedback and the assistance along the way. And so making sure that if we are expecting them to collaborate, that we are first teaching what that looks like and then giving that support throughout the process. Again, I'm a Google Apps person, that's one of my main tools I go with. And it's so easy just to have those students kind of playing everything out inside of a Google Doc or something like that and be able to check in on that periodically to make sure everybody is doing what they need to be able to do. And if you see that shy student kind of falling to the wayside, figure out what supports you need to give to that student to help them out.
I think that's a really interesting point on a couple of levels. I mean, I think the first two things that I think about when I hear you talk that way are largely the idea that, as Maggie said, as we design the learning, you have to be cognizant of all these different variables and think more globally. It's really about changing, I think, in some ways, what the work of educators is, particularly in relation to what previous practices have been. And so I start wondering about things like where my mind goes when I hear you talk about being explicit with wanting to teach collaboration, which I totally agree with, by the way. I always have to insert in my other point, which I think is so essential for something that we don't do a very good job on, at least right now. And this is for all learners, but I think it's particularly true for learners who have a need of an essential tool, is that ability to, and you probably know where I'm going to say here, is to self-advocate. Mm-hmm. To be able to say, hey, this is what I need to be successful. And I think we could be very intentional and teach those skills. So, it kind of looks different if you think about that. If we're teaching kids to advocate for, so they can play to their strengths, and then we're teaching them what their strengths are, and then we're teaching them, hey, this is what it looks like to collaborate. I mean, that's a really different looking classroom, isn't it?
It's a different looking world to me. I mean, think about that generation of learners out that's what we do as adults, right? That's what we want to see. Those are the people we want to work with. People who know their strengths, can advocate for their strengths, and then can collaborate with other people to play off of other people's strengths. Those are the people that we want to work with, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was just telling Patrick while we were off air before the start of the show, we just went through a selection process and hired a new person for my technical team. And, that's really, I'm looking for dispositions. I'm not looking for specific knowledge. Now, if someone comes to me knowledgeable, I think that's great, but that's not the difference maker. I'm looking for, a complementary fit to my team is really important. But along with that, I'm looking for certain dispositions, and most of those are revolving around the understanding of how to collaborate, how to learn, how to be a team player, all those sorts of, for lack of a better word, I hate to say it, but soft skills that make people successful. And and that's really the key thing that I want from my team. That's we're embedded in a learning organization, but this is, I'm hiring technical people. I'm hiring people to fix stuff. So this is kind of a real world sort of deal. And I couldn't agree more. I want to transition. I really want to get Megan's voice involved in the conversation because she's got so many interesting thoughts on so much of this. So before we do that, though, I want to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself. Like I said, I kind of fast tracked your previous introduction. And so why don't you just tell us what you do, where you do it, how long you've been doing it, and then, riff with us here a little bit. Talk about some of the stuff, because I know you got some thoughts on a number of things we've touched upon.
My name's Megan Sova-Tower. I teach at Prairie Creek Intermediate. I teach 5th and 6th grade, instructional strategist. I teach students with mild, moderate, severe, and profound disabilities. And I am going on my, 17th year of teaching. And I've taught in the general education setting. I was a social studies teacher in 7th grade. I've taught 8th grade math. I've also taught students, like they say, level 1 or instructional strategist 1 and instructional strategist 2, level 1, 2, 3, name it. I've probably taught it. So, as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm excited because when I think universal design, I think that whole piece of being an individual and individualizing every student's learning and that self-advocacy piece, but making all those tools available, but being cognizant of what they're good at and what they want to use. And I think that will make them advocate for themselves. I just think that we can individualize it so much more, which gives us so many more opportunities and getting to know the students. We think about ability inhibiting someone from accessing curriculum, and once you give them a tool and they're able to access it, it's amazing. And there's that mindset of it, like we said, it only looks one way. We have a student in a desk who's listening to a teacher, or they're writing their answers down when there's, Google Slides, there's speech to text. Instead of this, I don't know, but like this archaic view of what a student looks like. I have seen with my own eyes and my own students that thought that they were defined by their ability and thought that they could do only so many things or learn so many things. But when you give them some tools and teach them a new mindset, that listening to a higher order text, and understanding it is just as important, if not more, and means that, they have so much more ability than simply just reading it to themselves. Their whole world opens up, and then they want to use that tool. If it's a speech, text to speech or speech to text, something as simple as Google Keep with the checks boxes. Oh my gosh, kids that love to check off things and don't prefer to carry an agenda. There's the kids that want the right agenda. Something as simple as that. It amazes me how simple a tool can be, but can be so not like just changing for the student to be in control of their learning, or understand that they can, I can organize myself now and be independent and see what I need to do and get it done. And it's something as small as that.
I think that's fascinating because, it comes down to, in my mind, another critical feature of good instruction is engagement, right? And in my mind, that sort of presupposes the notion of student ownership. And some of the tools you talked about really help that process along. And this is one of my favorite all-time quotes. And I say it all the time. So if you've heard me say this, I apologize. But I'm an old English teacher too. So I've taught middle school, high school, elementary school, the whole 9 yards. But I do come from a literary background. And Mark Twain said, when writing, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between a lightning bug and a lightning bolt. And so what that really says to me is that those little differences are profound. They're profoundly powerful. And that's what I hear you saying, is that you can take a simple tool like Google Keep, and if you find the right niche where that allows that student to uncover a strength that they didn't know they had, or maybe they knew, but they didn't know how to access in the academic setting, and you give them permission and give them the ability to own that, this is absolutely life-changing for some of these kids, right?
Well, I think too, like I'm just thinking of a particular student that if you gave them a really low-level text, they couldn't read it. But if they listen to it at their grade level or higher, they can comprehend it, and they can tell you everything about it and give you details, and they can use inferencing. And for so long we've said, that's great, but that's not learning, or that's not being at grade level. And now, I've seen the same student where I've been like, yeah, you need to be in higher level classes and listening and understanding. But for so long we've pegged it by the physical work that they can do. And I think that it opens up such a bigger world for them when not being defined by just the physical work they're doing, but or turning in, in one, like we said, one way, but in multiple ways.
So I think that's interesting. And I've got kind of two thoughts rattling around in my brain. Megan, something you said was, for so long we've thought about this as being one way, and any other way is a crutch, or it's cheating, is kind of what I heard you say from a perspective of the teacher. So Craig mentioned, having student ownership and students owning their learning. But I think even if we take a step back, do you feel like it starts with the teacher, and the teacher owning a mindset to say, this isn't cheating. I'm looking at the standard, and however you get to that standard, you made the standard. I think that's a conversation that, at least where I'm working and where we're kind of coming from, is we're still having those conversations of, here's the standard, and they've met the standard, but it's in a different way than all of the other kids in the class. And so is that appropriate? Can I give them a full score?
Well, hold on. I got to jump in here. I have to jump in. And I'm going to turn it over to Megan in just a second. So I'm going to monitor my airtime, but I'm going to let Megan summarize some of the conversation. We had our accessible materials team meet last week, and Megan's on that team, of course. And one of the things we're wrestling with is at Prairie is right in the guts of that. We're starting to talk about, okay, what are the accommodations guidelines look like for our district common assessments? And, you know, we realize we don't have much flexibility with like the AYP stuff, the stuff we have to report to the state for, you know, ESSA and those things. But for our district assessments, we have absolute control over those. And then it starts a really interesting conversation, doesn't it? It's real. This is the real stuff, because you have to start grappling with exactly what we've already talked about. What is the standard? What are we assessing? And then you have to wrestle with some of those hard questions. Does it matter how the kid gets the standard? Now, sometimes you can make an argument that that's it, you know, a digital tool might be an inappropriate use, but most of the time, probably not.
So, I know. Yes. And then so you see how this bleeds, and it starts bleeding into standards-based reporting and really kind of into all of those other fun things that are out there that we always talk about. But oh, Megan, sorry.
I think Maggie, you had a good point. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
It's a student mindset. It's a teacher mindset. It's a community mindset. And it's like Craig said, what are you trying to accomplish with the standard? And that's where we have to dig into those standards and say, and we said this at the AIM meeting, are you learning to read? Are they learning to read, or are they reading to learn? And, you know, there are students that will never be able to learn to read for whatever reason. It might be from a disability, it might be from something else, but ultimately, you're not going to spend your entire life as an adult learning to read when you function as an independent citizen or as a community member. You're reading to learn. You need to learn something. So how can we make that many more students independent and involved citizens?
I think you're absolutely right. You know, I don't know if there is one district in the state of Iowa right now not doing a disservice to students in special education. I think each year we probably graduate kids or send them on their way, whether they graduate or not being able to read and not being able to accommodate for themselves and self-advocate for themselves, yet still cognitively able to function out in the world, but yet have not been given the tools to do so because we as educators haven't provided that to them. That weighs on me every single day, as it probably weighs on all of you. And I think until we get to the place where we say there's not going to be a kid that we're going to try our hardest to teach kids to learn, but we will not allow kids to walk out in 12th grade not being able to read or know how to accommodate themselves if they can't.
Well,
that needs to be the foundation.
That was a fascinating point too. Again, I don't want to keep referencing Prairie too much. I do want to give Patrick a chance to get in because I think he's chomping at the bit to get in here. But I do have to insert this last little piece before I do that. At our AIM meeting last week, I also serve on the community outreach board for the University of Iowa Center for Excellence in Disability. You know, the CDD, Center for Disability and Development, and so I've been talking a little bit about our work at Prairie with that committee. And so one of the consultants for the UI and the state of Iowa attended our meeting, and it was purely around employment. And this lady's name is Tammy Ansbaugh. And Tammy basically was great. She added to our conversation, added a lot of richness to it. But her sort of parting words I thought were really powerful when we were having conversations exactly like what you're talking there, Maggie. And she was saying basically from an employment perspective, particularly when it comes to we're building in dependencies into a lot of our kids, and this is a special ed issue, but it's one that's near and dear to my heart because of my family. For those of you who know, I have a significantly disabled child, and we're building in these dependencies, and we're essentially making these people unemployable because they're feeling they need to rely upon another adult to do a lot of this stuff. And her message to us was crystal clear and loud, which was, you cannot do that. I mean, even if we're talking about sending someone into a sheltered workshop environment, they're not going to have that other adult there to negotiate that environment for them. They're going to have to be able to do it on their own. And so many times we're doing our kids a disservice by trying to ease their passage through the system. And I agree. So again, I'm going to monitor our time. I've been talking too much.
Well, one thing I think I want to say is that, I kind of said this in a meeting I was in yesterday. I think we have to make sure we are making that shift from our focus on teaching to the focus on learning. I'm in my district, at my building, I do a lot of the work for our RTI, MTSS. We talk about our interventions, what supports are we giving to students. And just with the mindset that we have to have that every student pretty much almost now has to go to something post high school. Because, the old days of, well, if the kid failed high school, they can go to a factory or something. Those are gone because of automation. We want to then, how are we preparing our students to be able to enter that world? And, with the tools are just so readily available. We do pay for Snap and Read in our district. And I talk all the time with some of our teachers who are using it with their students. And then we still have a lot of teachers that don't know how to use it. And means their students don't know how to use it. Even though, I try to make all those resources myself readily available, but, we have these tools. Why aren't we using them? They can be as powerful as we need them to be.
So that's interesting. We just had that conversation today. I truly believe in universal design for learning, but that doesn't mean that the 250 special ed teachers and the 1,000-some general educators in our district have that mindset and that belief. And so unless we put assurances into our system to say, all right, we're gonna really focus on universal design and designing our instruction around a framework that supports all learners and gives them multiple means and ways to access their learning. That's great. What about the teacher that doesn't buy into that, right? And what are the assurances? And I think a multi-tiered system of supports offers just that. If we have data, universal screening data to suggest, oh, this kid's not meeting benchmark in their reading probes, we immediately, before we intervene and put them into interventions, why don't we just engage them back into core with some support? And then we can go back and intervene, right? Like it's a two-pronged thing. And for so long, we've just been intervening. While core still keeps moving forward, yet we're not meeting that student where they're at core during most of their day. I think that's another key component. Sorry.
No, I'm okay. That's great. That's an incredibly powerful point. And I would insert one additional thought into that, in that, we've talked a lot about UDL today, and I'd like to keep having this conversation. I think, and I said this kind of offline with a few of you individually, I think UDL is probably the most significant framework that I've seen in the last 10 years of my career. It's certainly in the last 3 years, it's shaped my thinking like no other. And I had the opportunity to attend a feedback meeting for the group putting together the digital learning plan for Iowa, which is largely based upon the National Ed Tech Plan. And the thing that's really cool about that is that UDL is featured prominently in both the National Ed Tech Plan and in at least the initial drafts of the Iowa plan. But here's some of the hangups. It sounds like, and I haven't really pinned this down. I've only gotten it through secondhand, so I haven't heard this firsthand from anybody at the Iowa Department of Education. But what I've heard through a couple of very reliable secondhand sources is that, at least from a special ed perspective, the Department of Ed is not really recognizing UDL or Universal Design for Learning as a recognized best practice framework. And you can't see if you're just listening, but Megan is shaking her head and giving a thumbs down. It's an absolutely crazy thought. Here's a couple of things that jump to me on that. First is that we as educators, I think, need to take this over and start driving this dialogue. We need to go to our educational leaders, people in the Department of Education, people at the AEA level. Anybody will listen and talk about the importance of UDL, because that's really what underpins this whole thing. And it's what makes standards-based learning work, competency-based education work, personalized learning work, all of the things that we purport to be priorities in the state of Iowa from a macro level. This is the engine that drives it. It's the currency that makes it go. And if we're not acknowledging it, and this is, as Maggie was talking about, some sort of assurances, I think that's where it all starts, is that if we adopt this one this one framework and start driving that into not only our current teachers' practice, but into the practice of teacher preparation schools and other places like that, I think we're going to make a lot of inroads. At the same time, you still have to overcome that basic mindset. So I'm going to reel it all the way back to that conversation we're having at Prairie, which is, okay, for district common assessments in 8th grade where they're doing reading comprehension, and that's the standard they're assessing, is it okay for read and write to use Google Read and Write to listen to the text? So that's what we're grappling with now.
How do I say this? You're touching on things that I was directly, some conversations I was directly involved in. So I'm not gonna go down that road. But I will say this: last fall, I had the opportunity to go to RTI Innovations. RTI Innovations is just it's a grassroots effort to really kind of get into a response to intervention or a multi-tiered system of supports and support the resources that we're giving to students. When I was there, the keynote speaker, Dr. Jerry Bash, he's one of the godfathers of response to intervention, or RTI, and he said he was focusing on tier 1, and he was talking about we have to have a universal tier that supports diverse learners and can support every learner. And he used the quote, "A high tide floats all boats." And when referencing that quote, he said the only high tide that I'm aware of when thinking about a universal tier of instruction is universal design for learning. The only way you're going to float every boat in your classroom and support every learner is through a universal design for learning. And I think that, to me, it was just blew me out of my chair, because that is a message that I had not been hearing in the state of Iowa within the conversation around a multi-tiered system of support. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to continue knocking on doors. We need to continue talking about that this is a framework for planning for diverse learner needs. It's not putting yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for saying that. I'm fist pumping. Mic drop for you.
Yeah, that making sure, I've gone to a lot of the solution tree stuff for RTI, and I have large stack of books on my desk at work. But the one phrase I think that I always will rewrite from that is high levels of learning for all students. Put the ALL in capital letters and I underline it. I've done that. It's on many whiteboards where I keep writing that and I underline it multiple times because, we talk about that tier 1, what's keeping that student from being successful in the classroom, not kick them out to somewhere else to get help, but what are we doing in the classroom? How can we help that student and every student and, all learners? One of the things I hate seeing is when, we have kids that are pushed out of a class just because they don't fit a certain mold. And then we expect them to either make it up or go online to get the credits or something like that, when really it's need to be, how are we designed for success for all students in every class, no matter if it's an AP class, general level class or anything like that. We should be designed for every student to be successful.
Well, it's really a great conversation, and we're all so strongly philosophically aligned, not surprisingly, based upon who we all are in our roles. What I really want to hear, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Megan, but I really value a practitioner's voice. Someone who's actually in the trench doing the work, and Patrick's doing a lot of that too. But I'd be just really interested to hear, kind of how you're bringing UDL to life for your kids. And working with not just your own students, but with as you work with the general ed teachers in your buildings. I know that you've done some of that. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot. If you don't have anything jumping right out at you, we can always move on. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
My perspective is, what kills me when I listen to all this is that you have the students with individual educational plans or IEPs. But to me, that's what UDL is. And, there wouldn't be this divide of general education students, special education students. I mean, they're all general education students, and we should be individualizing for everybody. I don't care if your ability is here, or here. And so when I think about UDL in my classroom, I think individualized to the students' needs, and what their interests are, what their abilities are. And so when someone would come into my classroom, I might have somebody working on an iPad that's been modified with larger lettering, and they're using SnapType Pro, where they can take a picture of a text and they can type right on it, and they can make the font like, 40 or whatever they need because of a vision impairment. And then I have another kid who's using his Chromebook for speech to text, and I might have another student drawing a picture, to tell me how they interpret it. And it looks so different. And as far as other teachers, just going and getting the word out and saying, I have a great tool you could use. I think you should try this. Or have you ever done this? I just try to showcase that and talk about it, and continue to show grade level material that's being understood and done. I have that same student who probably can't read higher than kindergarten or first grade, but grade level text can have a conversation with you. And it's finding those teachers that really believe in that, and then having it kind of expand from there. Because if you have some core teachers that really buy into that, and we definitely do at Prairie, that are willing to have students talk their papers instead of physically write them or listen to the text, and then they'll be like, all right, so in chapter 2, why was so-and-so, doing this, instead of just having them have a physical book, or giving children an opportunity to understand where they're at in learning and be able to be like, hey, I need this. But that's really what it looks like for me. And it's more so about me giving kids the tools. And then, like everybody said, for them to be like, I really need this. Or a student realizing like, oh, I don't have to, read text at this level. I could listen to them where all my peers are, and I understand it just as well. Oh, you're saying I'm just as smart as too long. Everybody's, based on their ability or what they can, quote unquote, show on paper. But that's kind of where I'm at with it. And there are a lot of exciting things going on. And again, UDL means to me that it's all students. I mean, this could have the opportunity to not even in years to come, not even see students as special ed students, but general education students who might have a disability, but they're doing, they're using their tools and being integrated. Like I'm so excited about the opportunities that this could create.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point of why we have these conversations, because it is essentially, in my mind, low-hanging fruit. I always use that terminology, but it's not. We can make a big dent in a hurry with this stuff. I earlier I wouldn't say I ripped on, but I kind of maybe disrespected the Department of Education a little bit with their lack of acknowledgement of UDL. On the other hand, I will say that as we look at the SDI framework, especially designed instruction framework that they have adopted and that they're making great strides with across the state with our special ed staff and across all districts. One of the first premises of SDI is all special education students are general ed students first. And really, this is the underpinning for my whole point in this, is that this is not a special ed thing. This isn't about special ed. This is about, as Maggie said, a high tide floating all the boats. And that's what gets me excited. I get passionate about this. So I get really amped.
I could talk about this all day.
I know.
And I love that I'm sitting here with 3 other people who just share the same sentiment. So this is great conversation. Thanks.
Well, we're coming up on that 45-minute mark, which is kind of our magic witching hour for friendly disruption. So as we kind of wrap up, I'll do a little summative talk, and then I'll give everybody a once around, see if they have any final parting thoughts or words of wisdom. But we spent some time, and I just am continually amazed by the work that Patrick's doing in Ames. And so much of this work is the thing I love about it is it's so simple yet so sophisticated. The idea of taking tools that are out there and using them to engage all kids, and not just kids with a special needs set, but any kid who might benefit from that. Tools like Padlet, and we'll get the link up for Padlet in the Twitter feed. Today's meet, he talked about that. He talked about using a Google form, and I can't speak to the Office 365 side of the world, but I'm sure there's polling tools out there in that realm too that would do the same thing. Those are really great. And then just the overall design notion, it's a UDL notion that we can have kids show their expertise in different ways. I think that's really commendable. So thanks. And then thanks to all the great conversation about UDL. We didn't really spend as much time on the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, but I'm sure that'll pop into other conversations as we go on in future episodes, because that's just drafted here in Iowa. So with that, I'm going to go do a quick whip around to each of our panelists here and see if they have any final parting thoughts. So why don't we start with you, Maggie? I'm going to work our way around what it looks like on my screen anyway.
Well, I think that a high tide does float all boats, and the critical part to that is a mindset. And so when we can come to the table and encourage as leaders in this work a mindset that does assure that students do receive the instruction that they deserve, I think all will be well.
Thanks. I agree. And by the way, we're all leaders, teachers, students, all of us. So it takes all of our voices together. Patrick, we're going to go to you, and then we'll finish with our guest.
I'm just going to reiterate. Yeah, it's a mindset. And, I think it is the easiest thing for a teacher to get overworked, overstressed, and then just worry about teaching. But if we know what we want students to learn and we focus on that, then it shouldn't matter how we get to that. It shouldn't matter the path, as long as we get to the right place. So I think it all goes to mindset again too.
Yeah, I think it's Buddy Barry's line was you gotta navigate like you're using a compass and not a map. You kind of know the general direction where you're going. You're not getting bound up in the how.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And finally, our guest. So thank you so much, Megan, for joining us tonight. It was awesome to have you on. Any final thoughts for us tonight?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you inviting me, because this has been super exciting. This whole movement is super exciting. I think that it's, that mindset, that growth mindset, and we said it earlier, all means all. Students. That's where I see this leading is, students learning, how they're learning. It's going to take all different types of paths. We all do things our own way, and it's just all students all the time.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So that's going to wrap it up for episode 10 of Friendly Disruption. We appreciate you listening. Again, check out our Twitter feed. You can follow us on Twitter at FDisruption. We'll be posting the links to the various tools we talked about, and any of the other interesting ideas we get there. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.